to begin one of these totally blank slates, I find it really helpful to put in just a base geometry. I'm going to begin with just a cube in the space, and go ahead and save the level. So I did cheat and I made a new level. I have a couple other samples I've made that I'll showcase later on, but to begin this blank one, we're just going to start with a cube and a little bit of lighting just to help illuminate the scene. So I'm going to drag in a directional light and an exponential height fog. I find this is really useful because without these, the cube can just be totally black or not illuminated, so you can't really see what's being composed in the scene. And the third piece I'll drop in is just going to be a skylight. And the skylight is going to serve to illuminate these shadows. So without the skylight, what you can see is that these shadows just kind of bleed in together, like it's just a pure black. But with the skylight in, it will apply a flat lighting across all of the different surfaces. So the shadows become illuminated. But now that we have these three components in, the directional light, the exponential height fog, and the skylight, haven't changed them at all, literally just dropped them into the scene, that should be good enough base to start building out our scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to really quickly kind of go through and gray box out our still life. So just beginning with this cube even, I'm just going to use the gumball tools to stretch and get a floor. Now I'm actually going to just drag a new cube in. And I'll grab both of these. This grid is handy sometimes, but I don't really want it to be over top of what I'm working on, so I'll just kind of pull it above the grid. And I happen to know that this cube is about a good scale for the setup that I want, but if you want to check the scale, a really good thing to do is you can grab the third person character, but when you add the third person blueprint, it will come with this mannequin folder in the content browser. And if you go to the character mesh, there are two different meshes of characters you can drag and drop into the scene. And these are nice because they can give you a sense of scale really, really quickly. So I just dragged in the female mannequin, and you can just see that that comes up to about her waist. And that's pretty much the height of a table. So I just know right off the bat that that will be a good scale for this. Well, now that I know this scale, you could even just delete the mesh out, but I'll leave this character in just so we can continue having a sense of how large everything is as we build it. I'm actually going to immediately just kind of sit a camera, and I'm just going to do it really quickly, and I'm going to use it to essentially generate a target for our composition. If you set up a camera early, you'll know exactly what angle you are composing your scene for. Of course, since it's a fully 3D scene, you can go in afterwards, tweak it, even find alternative camera angles. But I think it's really helpful, especially for these still life exercises, to predetermine a camera angle. So I'm just going to come up here into the viewport and use the pull down menu and go to create camera here and create a cinema camera actor. To occupy the camera actor, you actually just go up to where it says perspective, you skip down over these useless viewports, and you go to the cinema camera actor. So now that you're in the cinema camera actor, I'm just going to actually, in its properties, all I'm going to do is zero out its rotation and put this one at 90 because it's just 90.23 something. So I just have those zeroed out, and now we have really essentially a 1-point perspective of this view is what we're going to be designing for. And now you can see the camera is in the scene. That's really useful because now we know what's going to be the front and the back. So we may not even need to build anything over on this side because it's going to be behind the camera. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take this cube and hold Alt and drag to make a copy. And I'm just going to use that copy to build a super duper quick enclosure. So I just hold Alt and rotate to make a copy that's rotated. And similarly, I'm just going to Alt and drag. And I might even pull these walls in a bit. So we already have this. I'm actually going to go ahead and put a ceiling over this as well. So I'm actually just going to grab the floor and hold Alt and drag the floor up. So now if we jump to the camera, we can see this is kind of the setup. I'm not super happy with how far away this wall is, so I'm just going to drag it in. This is pretty interesting. I think it could be better if maybe there was like a window behind. So let's design a really quick window. And this will get better as we replace it with other geometry. But as a starting point, this is fine. I'm just super duper quick and dirty, Alt dragging these around. And this is the essence of greyboxing. You know, you're just really quickly massing out the scene. And so, you know, this portion of it is going to be totally up to you and the kind of scene you want to compose. The important thing, though, is that you have a surface or some kind of focal area, a foreground, if you will, for your still life. And once you have, you know, some kind of scene composed, you'll start to compose smaller geometries on the still life surface. I'm actually even going to shrink this to be more like some kind of table. And actually, let's just do like a window side table. I'm going to just drag all of these. I'm just holding Shift and selecting to add them to selection so that then all move together. Maybe you can even see like kind of what that's looking like in camera. It's a little close, so we can of course just move the camera back as well. But since we're doing this way, you know, I'm just again Shift clicking, like holding Shift down and clicking to add them to selection. Just gonna move them that way. This is kind of nice because now I can see the floor and the walls and the window. Of course, this window is super deep and kind of ridiculously so. So, you know, this kind of stuff will come out as we push along. But the important thing is just to start somewhere. It doesn't really matter where you start as long as you start. So I'm just really quickly switching through the scale and move and all those tools. This seems pretty interesting to me, so we'll just kind of roll with it. I'm not crazy about those walls being in the background, so I'm just going to move those out. And a nice trick that you can do, if you want something to sit on top of something, you can press, with it selected, you press the End key, which on my keyboard is over on the right-hand side above my arrow keys next to my Delete key, but it might be just different for your keyboard. But I'm just kind of thinking, you know, maybe this is a fruit. Maybe this is like an orange. Maybe this is like a slightly smaller one. You know, like just kind of composing it. I am keeping in mind this vantage point, right? Like I know that I'm going to be looking at it this way, so I want things to maybe lead into the center or lead into a third or some ratio on the setup here. I'm going to use another cube. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time composing this. And this is a good part when I'll probably show in the video a nice montage. Okay, so once I have this little scene set up, I'm just going to now focus more specifically on the lighting in the scene. This one, I'm actually going to begin with the fog. So I have a fog in the scene here, and I'm just going to select it, the actor for the fog. Notice I'm just going to kind of stay in this camera view for a bit, but I'm going to use the exponential height fog, and I'm going to make it volumetric, which you won't really notice it change now, but it'll come in later. And I'm going to crank up the density. So here, Unreal Engine lies to you. If you try to slide the bar, it'll cap it at 0.05, but you can type in numbers that are higher than that. Here I just typed in 1, and you'll see that is almost totally fogged that out, which is too much, perhaps. So I will just try 0.5. I'll try 0.2. That feels a little better. Actually, maybe just 0.1. It's fine. Fairly subtle. I actually kind of like this really simple geometry with a nice shadow on it there. To contain this box, I'm actually just going to really quickly close this room. And now I'm going to swap all of these lights to be movable in this scene. And that will immediately hide all of those preview text blobs, which will be really nice for what we're going to be doing. So now I have my room set up, right? Very, very simple room. It's mostly focused on just this one window. It's a very contained scene. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin the lighting process. So I want this to be, I really like the outside lighting. I think it just kind of worked out well, and it's giving this window a nice composition in the background. So really I'm just focusing on the foreground lighting. And I'm going to have it set up so that it mimics the background. I'm going to set it up so that there's a light maybe shining in here from the side. So to do that, I'm going to use a spotlight because it's a single direction rather than a point light. So it'll be more focused. And it will give us this nice, obvious kind of curve. So even though I'm in the camera, I still have that light selected. So if I use the location, like the transform controls, you'll see I can just move it here as well. But I'm going to jump out of the camera and rotate this. I'm going to use some of these spotlight controls now to start focusing the light directly on the scene. So I'm actually going to make it movable. And I'm going to narrow the outer cone radius. You'll see exactly what that's doing here. And at the same time, I'm going to bump the intensity. I'm noticing that the inside here is still pretty bright. So I don't really like that. So what I want to do is I'm going to try hiding the skylight. That is actually pretty nice. I think instead of just totally hiding it though, which I did by just clicking the effects world button, I'm just going to lower it. I'll try 0.1 because I want a little bit of a skylight. It's nice that it illuminates the edges of the window. I'm going to try even lighter than this though. I don't really like now how that's affecting the outside though. So what I think we'll do is we'll leave the directional light on the outside, and I'll just illuminate the interior with artificial lighting entirely. And to do that, I'm just going to drag in a point light. And I'm going to pull it to the same side. I'll actually even put it in the same position as the spotlight. That's kind of interesting. So the spotlight is acting as if it has some focused area just onto this table here. So now that I'm kind of looking in this camera and there is that point light up there, I'm actually going to add another point light to start just to soften these shadows on this side. But I don't really want this light to cast its own shadows. This is going to be acting kind of like a mini skylight in this shot. So what I'm actually going to do though is I'm going to uncheck the box on this one for it to cast shadows. This is just some kind of universal illumination on this set of faces. I think this will be a good base for us to begin with. I do have more lights in the scene, so I'm going to have to change settings on more lights. So the first point light I'm going to make movable. I'll actually make both of them movable just to eliminate any need for baking in this particular one. Movable just kind of simplifies this whole process out. But on the spotlight, so what I'm actually going to do here for a second is I'm actually going to just click all of these lights in the world outliner, and I'm just going to move them to their own new folder. I just right click and say make new folder. I'm going to say this folder is the lighting folder. And now I'm going to move the spotlight to that same folder as well. And now I have a contained folder here just for lighting in this scene. So if I select the spotlight, now I have that. What I want to do is I'm noticing that these shadows are not necessarily attached to the meshes that they belong to. So I want to make sure that those are tightened up. And to do that, I'm going to enter in to the spotlights settings, and there is this pull down menu here under the light category that will say show advanced. And this brings us into the shadow settings. And I'm just going to play around with a few of these values, particularly the shadow bias and the shadow slope bias. These are the most dramatically impacting factors. Okay, that's not super clean, but we can maybe work on that by raising the shadow resolution scale. We can try contact shadows, but I find that they are better for game work than for small contained work like this. And I know that shadow is kind of pixely, but I don't think we'll even be able to tell from a distance. This kind of stuff too, it will change really drastically once we replace these meshes later on. So if you have a little bit of this kind of stuff, don't worry about it. It'll go away once you replace these meshes. So I mentioned that I built a couple of other scenes. So here I'm just going to have a sped up version montage of me grayboxing those scenes out. And the idea here isn't that you'd copy me, but that you make your own scene out of these. So this one's maybe very telling. I didn't really know where this one was going to go to start. So it started as like a pure kind of square room, and then it evolved and turned into a colonnade as I got a little bit of inspiration just by assembling the pieces there. And then I just extended the colonnade out to be a pretty deep corridor, but that's really just serving as purely as a background for this table that's actually in the foreground. So you don't have to go that crazy or anything, but it just felt like it would make for an interesting scenario here, so I set it up. The next one though, the V3, is much simpler, and this is totally fine, right? Like there's no right or wrong way to do this. The idea is just that you spend some time and compose a scene that you think will be interesting.